I'm Danny Carranza. I'm an agrarian reform activist. I am with FIAN Philippines, and I am also connected with this network called Rights Network. We've been campaigning for agrarian reform in the Philippines since Marcos years and during the time of President Aquino. So we have an agrarian reform policy which is mandated by the Constitution, and it mandates the state to implement an agrarian reform program founded on the right of the tillers to own the lands they till. And it's very significant, especially at this point, because the Philippines, along with Zimbabwe, are the only two countries which have ongoing agrarian reform program. And we feel that because of that, the agrarian reform programs in both countries should be highlighted internationally. Right now, the most important agrarian reform case in the Philippines is Hacienda Luisita, because of a lot of representations that it has in regard to poverty. It is owned by the family of the president, and as the main leader of the country, the president should be showing the way and promoting agrarian justice and equity and economic development of the rural poor, and which makes the Hacienda Luisita case very significant. Secondly, it's also a representation of the historical injustice committed against the Filipinos being an hacienda, which is one of the main vestiges of oppression under the Spanish colonial rule, which has not yet been corrected up to this juncture, and distributing that would be a way of promoting justice at this current context and historically. And thirdly, the agrarian reform program in the Philippines needs an inspiration and a last push, and that can happen if the government will now more seriously pursue the distribution of Hacienda Luisita. Now, Hacienda Luisita is a very large estate, one of the largest haciendas in the Philippines. It is 6,453 hectares, but most of significant portions of it has been converted into industrial and commercial uses. And so in 1989, the Coancos reported that the remaining agricultural land was only 4,915 hectares, and that was the one covered under the agrarian reform program. It has, as of 1989, 6,296 farm workers. So many farm worker families are dependent on that for their livelihoods. But the problem there is that the agrarian reform scheme implemented in that area is not redistributed. Instead of land distribution, the family of President Noynoy Aquino distributed stocks of the corporation as a way of implementing the agrarian reform program, which is one of the loopholes in the law, which has been campaigned by agrarian reform advocates. The agrarian reform advocates in the Philippines demanded that it be revoked because it's contrary to public policy and it's not addressing the agrarian justice and equity requirements of the farm workers there. So the case went up all the way to the Supreme Court, and there were already two very favorable decisions issued by the Supreme Court, one in November 22, 2011, and the other one is very recent, issued on April 25, 2012. The said decision mandates the government to revoke the stock distribution option and to redistribute the land to the 6,296 farm worker beneficiaries inside the hacienda. So we think that the redistribution of the hacienda receipt will be very significant in that it will inspire the last push for agrarian reform in the Philippines and maybe impact at the national level, because the case has been the main symbol of recalcitrant landowners, those who are resisting land distribution by any means. And if the redistribution can take place, then maybe resistance to redistributive agrarian reform will somehow mellow, and it will result in the redistribution of the remaining more or less 1 million hectares that is covered under the agrarian reform program of the government. And I think it can also inspire social movements in other countries to look at agrarian reform as as a policy for distribution. Of course, they need an agrarian reform policy, they need a law, and by way of Hacienda Luisita, they may use the lessons in Hacienda Luisita being owned by, I think, one of the most powerful families in the Philippines, as an example of successful agrarian reform. But right now, it's still in between success and failure. While we have the decision of the Supreme Court as asserting the rights of the farm workers there to own the land state deal, we still need to push the government into realizing that order of the Supreme Court, so that it will inspire the redistribution not only of that particular hacienda, but all of the remaining big haciendas in the Philippines. So we see the centrality of the issue, and we are focusing on the redistribution of that hacienda as a model of making sure that the agrarian reform program in the Philippines will be substantially completed. We still have a remaining balance of more or less 1 million hectares in the Philippines, which could benefit up to 500,000 families. Now, the agrarian reform program there has been ongoing since 1988. It's the most comprehensive program relative to the other policies, and it has, I think, distributed officially 5 million hectares, but we feel that that official pronouncement is still below what's actually needed to be covered. There are still other haciendas and big land holdings, including public lands, that need to be reformed. But all this would be inspired by the agrarian reform, by the redistribution of Hacienda Luisita to its farm workers. So at this point, between now and maybe 2013, the Hacienda Luisita redistribution will play a crucial role in the substantial completion of the agrarian reform program in the Philippines.